Hi, and welcome to CityWorks, a production of the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies and CUNY TV. I'm Laura Flanders. Each month, CityWorks takes a look at working people's lives at home, at work, at homework in New York and the greater urban landscape. Our program today looks at two very different issues in two very different places. One, a historic win here in New York for undocumented workers. The other, a loss, at least on its face. The loss took place when the Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union took on the mighty Amazon, the rapacious online seller, now also massive manufacturer, media company, and #2 private employer in the US with over 750,000 employees. Amazon opened a plant in Bessemer, Alabama, not long ago, one of the hardest places in the world to wage a successful unionization fight, a fact Amazon no doubt counted on. So when warehouse hourly employees won a campaign to hold a union election last fall, that in of itself was a victory. A lopsided loss by the union in that vote just now has left pro-worker advocates wondering what went wrong, what's next, and what lessons are to be learned. What's for certain is that US unions aren't giving up their drive to reorganize America. Our guests today are proof of that. Jessica Garcia is assistant to the president of the union that tried to organize those workers in Bessemer. And our second segment has to be scored as one of the biggest wins in decades. Undocumented New Yorkers are now eligible for more than $2 billion under the Excluded Workers Fund. This historic legislation came after an enormous push from advocates who capped off their campaign with a hunger strike for 20 days to draw attention to the urgent needs facing undocumented New Yorkers. Cut out of unemployment, denied stimulus checks, many were the very same essential workers that people had counted on during the worst of the pandemic. Now, at last, some assistance is available for an estimated 300,000 New Yorkers categorized as undocumented. And with us today is Angelis Solis, lead organizer for Make the Road, who helped win this extraordinary recognition of our fellow New Yorkers. I want to thank you both for joining me today on CityWorks. Let's start, Angelis, with you. Bessemer, Alabama. We are excited to talk about this today and talk about what it means for the nation. Before we get to Jessica, let me ask you, were you watching what was happening in Alabama? I mean, some people are calling this the most significant labor struggle of the 21st century, even though it went down to defeat.
Absolutely. And I'm so honored to be on this show with my colleague, Jessica, my comrade, someone who has been from the beginning pouring their heart and soul into this struggle. I think the RWDSU should be hailed as heroes in the labor movement for setting an example of standing up to the biggest bosses in our backyard and in our world. So I think the world was watching, and Make the Road is incredibly proud to be partnered with the RWDSU, and we look forward to the next iteration of this battle because although it was a close loss, it's a victory in terms of what we can accomplish and how much attention we can garner on exploitative bosses and employers like Amazon.
And Jessica, to you, I mean, you had to know how many people were watching. You must have felt it there at the union. Why was this so significant? And then we're going to hear from some of the workers as they spoke at a press conference shortly after the defeat.
Yeah, no, and I want to echo the thanks and to my sister Angelis. We really have been partners in the struggle for a while now. So it's definitely a privilege to be on the show with her and with you to talk about this. This was significant in that we were going up against a behemoth, a giant. Our local president down south described this as a David versus Goliath battle. Unfortunately, this time around, David did lose. But it's important because companies like Amazon are shaping the future of retail. They're shaping the future of commerce. They are the future of work. And if we allow the exploitive working conditions that they practice to continue, allow workers to feel as if they're just robots. They described their work as servitude, hearkening slavery. These are really extreme conditions that they're forced to go through on 10, 11-hour shifts a day.
Well, your president, Stuart Applebaum, kicked off a press conference shortly after the election results were announced and gathered together several of the workers who'd been involved in the organizing. And here's just a glimpse of that press conference that will give you a sense of the workers' spirit. Take a look.
Of course, we're going to be feeling a lot of different things right now. Of course, we're going to be disappointed, frustrated, angry about the way this election has turned out because of the being misled and manipulated and lied to. But we will keep fighting. We still have to go to work tomorrow. We still have to work next week. And this experience has bonded us. And if this election, if we had to lose this election here in Bessemer for people across the United States to succeed, that is the point. Our time will come around again, and next time we will win. But at the same time, we have done so much. We have inspired so many people. We have gained so much support in Congress and across the United States.
I am not discouraged. I'm happy. I'm proud because, like I said, this is the beginning. It's not over. I'm going to stay in it till the end. Bezos, you're wrong. You are wrong all the way around. You misled a lot of our people. You told us they was going to take all our money. Where are you taking all our money? We're going to fight. I'm not going nowhere. I want all of my fellow Amazonians to know that. It's not over.
I know the outcome is not what we built it to be. I know the outcome is not what a lot of people may want to hear. But today I want to encourage the Amazon workers to let them know how proud I am of them, to let them know that they have done something amazing, that this has been one of the biggest labor battles in the last 25 or 30 years, and they was a part of that. I believe this is the foundation for something great that's about to happen all over the world. And by no means that this is the end right here. We just have begun to fight. Failure is not in my category. I don't even know what that means. So right now, we're gonna fight and we're gonna continue to fight.
In that video recorded right after the election defeat, you can hear their emphasis on this fight goes on, the struggle continues. We'll get to that. But what they didn't emphasize in that moment was just some of the, I would call them dirty tactics that they were up against. There are certainly structural challenges and legal things that need to be fixed, but just on the ground, what can you tell us, Jessica Garcia, about what Amazon did to defeat this union vote?
They put their money into defeating the union. They hired 2 consulting firms paying thousands of dollars a day per consultant, bringing in hundreds of them into the facility to organize what we call captive audience meetings, where they instilled fear in workers, painting a picture of the union, a very negative picture of the union, and scared them with threats of their benefits being taken away, of the union making them go on strike and them not being able to get paid. So the messaging was just really, really extreme. It was overwhelming. The fear in workers was very real. Unfortunately, we couldn't muster the support when it came down to the vote. But considering the extent of the intimidation and the fear that was instilled in workers, it's not surprising. This was a company that knew that a lot was at stake, and they put a lot of resources, a lot of time, flying in people from out of town just to make sure that they let workers know what they needed them to do and what they expected them to do.
Mandatory meetings, malicious messaging. I mean, the list is long. The company, of course, would say that they didn't do anything illegal and that what they did was completely within the law. But in a sense, that's part of the problem, isn't it, Angelis? There are a lot of very brutal challenges workers have as they try to form a union. It shouldn't be this hard, should it? Where did you go for your information about what was happening in Bessemer?
I really like how you said it should not be this hard to fight for a union, especially in the United States of America. Around the world, union rights have to be protected. And we all know that Black and Brown and immigrant workers, when unionized, have a far greater chance of having health insurance, of having higher wages, protections for their families, and honestly, better mental health outcomes and life stability overall. So to answer your question, where did I get my information? Well, as an organizer, I make sure to listen to organizers and to my colleagues at the unions. However, I will say that it is incredible that so much of the world wanted to step up and help. And in taking leadership, in taking direction from organizers on the ground and worker leaders, we're able to inform our campaigns to have a strategic impact. It can be really easy for a lot of us, especially the public, to think, oh my goodness, Amazon is hurting people, I won't buy from Amazon. But in reality, a boycott when it comes to a monopoly cannot be the sole strategy that we have in taking them down. Sorry, let me be a little bit more taking them on. But it's really important to listen to organizers on the ground, to worker leaders, and to make sure that we're adopting a diversity of tactics when it comes to taking on abusive monopoly corporations. I think that the RWDSU is just one of the many leaders, along with Make the Road and community organizations across the country, unions around the world, brainstorming on this issue and doing more than that, right? Taking action to the streets, negotiating with employers, and organizing workers in their workplace directly in the hardest places to organize.
Well, let's turn to that, and we'll come back to Bessemer in just a second. But Angeles, as you look at that excluded workers fund and the big win that you helped to win this spring in New York State, what are the lessons that you draw from that? And do you think of this as an alternative to worker organizing in the workplace? Or just as another aspect of what do you do? How do they relate?
Yeah.
Maybe you could tell us a bit more about what went into the campaign.
Yeah, similar to how you said, Laura, that it should not be this hard to organize a union. It should not be this hard to be an immigrant in New York or anywhere. And I think here in New York, we just established a multi-billion-dollar program for expanding unemployment benefits to all workers, regardless of immigration status. The same way that we view healthcare or sick days or paid family leave. These should be rights, not luxuries, not benefits, but things that are protected for anyone who labors, regardless of whether they're residents, citizens, or undocumented people. We had for a year seen our immigrant neighbors struggle to survive. Here in the city of New York, just to give some perspective, 52% of essential workers are immigrant or foreign born. Of the delivery workforce, almost 90% of delivery workers are immigrant and foreign born, meaning that the people delivering food so that everyone else could work comfortably from their home over Zoom were the ones pressing elevator buttons that got them sick. Were the ones heading out to the street and all the elements because they had no other choice but to find work or get sick, find work and stay alive. So we knew that we had to mount a campaign to expand unemployment benefits as a basic right. And we're looking at the possibility, we're looking at legislation. We just helped pass legislation that will bring home $15,000 checks to some applicants and others as much as $3,000. And for many of our families, that's a huge relief. It's not enough, but it's a huge relief. And hopefully that small contribution will get us closer to a state that ensures a just recovery for all, and not just for wealthy New Yorkers, and not just for New Yorkers with set immigration status.
Richard Schrumpka of the AFL-CIO, in that press conference that we watched a little bit of, says that this is the moment in which the potential for pro-worker change right now is virtually limitless. What kind of changes would you like to see? And what kind of changes would be as significant in this era as those changes were then? Because maybe that will nonetheless come out of Alabama once again.
Let's hope so. I mean, foremost and most immediate would be passage of the PRO Act, which is legislation that has passed in the House. It is now in the Senate. And if we can find the will and the way of moving it through the Senate, it would mean the difference between workers being able to form a union quickly. It would make illegal captive audience meetings, which are so damaging to a unionizing campaign. It would increase penalties for violating of the NLRA for employers so that they don't use these anti-union tactics and violate the law flagrantly, knowing that they're not going to get penalized harshly for it. So it would create stiffer penalties. It would create stronger protections for workers with anti-discrimination and anti-retaliation provisions that are much stronger than what we have in the books now. It would ease the way for a vote by forcing arbitration on first contracts if a union and a company can't come to an agreement, so that there actually is a contract, so the company can't keep delaying by forcing to meet workers in a fair way. It just would make a huge, and it would allow for the voting process to just be easier, for the petitioning process to be easier. So it would make a world of difference against companies like Amazon, who just have the deck stacked in their favor. Some would argue that no matter what we had done in Bessemer, we would have lost just because of how hard this campaign was to begin with. And we knew that going in, but we chose to fight the fight for other reasons, knowing that we could still have a loss. And for the workers, you started the conversation with this. I think that's the hard part about accepting a loss. It's just the disappointment for workers because they put so much on the line, so much at stake. And when you hear about the fear that was instilled in them day to day, and the fact that they still had the courage to vote yes, they still had the courage to talk to their workers. There's just so much. I have so much respect for them, and just really like privileged to have worked with them the last year on this campaign. But the hope is that they also gained hope from this, and we don't want to lose that. We want to keep them motivated and see that their actions have led to something. And so, whether it's passage of the PRO Act, whether it's winning through the NLRB through ULP charges, whether it's just improving working conditions day to day, that would be a huge win. These workers are working under extreme temperatures day to day. They are they're treated as if they're robots, literally, as if they're not really human. They have so many injuries in the workplace. Their ability to access workers' compensation is minimal. So if we could change some of these conditions in the short term, that would make a world of difference for these workers.
I don't think we've emphasized just how many workers are in that plant in Bessemer. It's between 5,000 and 6,000, isn't that right? And they
That's
use
right.
that phrase a lot, feeling like robots.
Yes, because it's true. That's the one thing that they would say all the time to us.
It's no coincidence, I suspect, that we're talking about a largely African-American, Latinx, and just largely female population, or at least a lot of women of color in the mix. Racism, racial divides have always worked well, especially in the history of the South, but not just there, to divide workers. And they certainly did in the years since the 30s. If we're going to achieve those, what did he say? Practically, virtually limitless goals and victories for workers in this era, Angelis, what have you learned from your work about how to bring people together? Because the fight for excluded workers was also one that had to be won against a lot of opposition and a lot of stereotypes and bad mouthing of immigrants.
That's such a good question. It says a lot that at the beginning of the pandemic, not only state leadership, including our governor, but the public as a whole found it quite easy to rely on immigrant labor to survive during this pandemic, while not necessarily ensuring that they had access to the same resources to do so. I'm thinking back to the beginning of the pandemic when our governor was confronted by a group of immigration activists who asked him, what will you do for undocumented workers? What will you do for the immigrant population in New York? And he essentially relegated the responsibility to President Donald Trump at the time. Our governor has written a book on his leadership while the real heroes of New York died. at Make the Road, we lost 90 of our members in the first 6 weeks, 90 members who, like I said, had no other choice but to go out and find work and risk getting COVID, and many of them did. And many did not survive. So I think it was, as organizers, it was an opportunity for us to take that devastation, take that anger, take that grief and that rage and organize. And we took it to the streets. We were one of the first community organizations to mobilize in person during the pandemic, starting with caravans and then moving on to marches and rallies. And this was, again, from the direction of our membership, who said, I can either stay at home and lose everything here while I sit and make calls to my legislators, or we can take some real risks and show them, if you want to see that I'm hungry, if you want to see that I'm desperate, I'm going to bring it to your doorstep. So we organized sleep outs in front of Jeff Bezos's home. We organized walkouts at the Amazon warehouses. We organized 2 hunger strikes in a pandemic that were primarily led and participated in by immigrant mothers, working mothers, single mothers, domestic workers, domestic cleaners, people who have nothing but were the frontline workers for everybody else. And I really want to reiterate that it's the bravery of our membership. It's the bravery of workers taking every risk, whether it's to fight for a union or to fight for a fund, that paved the way for, honestly, for history. This is a moment where we look back and we see who stood up for everyone else, who took those risks, and we learn from them.
The point that you made about Bezos and just mentioning him personally reminded me that in this time, many community organizations, I don't know about Make the Road, but many nonprofit organizations are dependent on the largesse of men like Bezos, who have made enormous amounts of money in this period and before. There are great contributions being made to nonprofits and being made even by Bezos at this time. How do we need to think about that as we nonetheless organize and broker the kind of community organization labor relationships that are represented by this panel? Can he buy off people, I guess, is my question. Is there a danger of that? Angelis.
This is such a timeless question, especially right now in a pandemic where we've seen billionaires and multimillionaires gain over 187 billion in the worst economic disaster for the last generation, for the last 100 years. And there is going to be a lot of rhetoric around the Bill Gates and the Jeff Bezoses stepping up to lead vaccination efforts, right? If we look even at Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson & Johnson, these are monopoly corporations that have benefited private shareholders in a pandemic and have restricted the knowledge and use of vaccines, right? So I think taking a step back, we have to remind ourselves in the public that billionaires are not saviors and that monopoly corporations cannot be trusted to lead life-saving critical work. So can the people be bought? No. But can we be agitated? Can we be educated? Can we be organized in order to take on negligent bosses and corporations? Absolutely. And I think that what we just proved in Bessemer, what we just proved with the Excluded Workers Fund shows that even the most marginalized, even the most oppressed community members can reclaim their power and demand from the state what's theirs, demand from their employers what's theirs to begin with, which is the protection of their rights and the benefits that they're afforded. And we cannot, I would say that it's really critical to focus on the victories in the organizing and not fake philanthropic or shallow promises from even the most charitable donors.
Well, that comes back to you, Jessica. I mean, unions are the great alternative to what I've been calling the philanthro-feudalism of this period. Rather than be dependent on philanthropists, why not be dependent on the power of your fellow workers? But unionization at the US is in a historic low in private companies. What are we going to do about that? What are you going to do about that, Jessica? And what about the union? What comes next?
We have to keep organizing. And, we need to realize, I think for labor, we need to recognize that we are organizing in different times against multi-global corporations who wield a lot of power, who are more responsive to shareholders than to their workers. And that means that our strategies need to be a lot more sophisticated. we need to partner in different ways, which is one of the ways that RWDSU, one of the reasons that RWDSU is just so proud of the partnership that we have with Make the Road and other organizations. And one of the reasons we partnered with groups on the ground in Bessemer, because we knew that we couldn't go at this alone. And in an ideal situation, private foundations are supporting groundwork with nonprofit organizations to allow them to build the deep connections that they need with labor and with the community to really strengthen workers' rights overall. But this is a multi-generational battle. Unfortunately, it's not going to be a quick fix. But and we at labor need to be committed to that and just understand that we're not going to have the quick win. We're not going to win the 6,000 worker facility overnight. It's going to take some time.
Well, I want to thank you both for being with us here at CityWorks, and also point out that we need to support the independent media that brings these stories. We can't rely on media owned by Amazon to report on Amazon, just for example. But thank you both. Jessica Garcia of the RWDSU and Angelis Solis from Make the Road New York. CityWorks is produced by the City University of New York School of Labor and Urban Studies with CUNY TV. You can send comments to me and us at CityWorks at slu.cuny, that's CUNY.edu. For CityWorks, I'm Laura Flanders. Thanks for joining us.